Welcome to the Plain Gospel Talk with your host, Matt Tyson, a podcast where Scripture has the final word.
Welcome to the Plain Gospel Talk, where Scripture has the final word. My name is Matt Tyson, and I'm glad that you've joined us for our episode today. Today's episode is called Scrubs, Sirens, and Souls. And I'm joined by my brothers in Christ, Aaron Batty, Nehemiah Wall, and Clay Nelson, where we're talking about what it looks to live for Christ in the middle of emergency medicine. When we're in hospital hallways and ambulances or on scenes where life and death meet. Every shift brings stories. Some are funny, some are heavy, and some of those we'll be sharing with you today. Some change you forever, but every patient that we interact with and that you interact with has a soul, and every moment that we're given is an opportunity to reflect the compassion and the love of Jesus Christ. So today we're not just talking about our jobs and the roles that we're in as nurses or paramedics. We're talking about the Great Commission and how we can fulfill the Great Commission in the role and the career path that we've chosen. And I hope that there's application and things that you can pull out to apply into your career field as well. Let's get into it. Welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited about this conversation because it kind of brings together two things that matter deeply to myself and my three brothers in Christ with us today, faith and frontline medicine. Today I'm joined by three brothers in Christ, Brother Aaron Batty, who's an ER nurse, brothers Nehemiah Wall and Clay Nelson, who are both paramedics, and myself, also a paramedic. And we're going to have a panel discussion about evangelism in healthcare. Every day, people walk into rooms and houses where life hangs in the balance, where fear is real, where families are desperate for hope, and where eternity doesn't necessarily in that moment feel like a distant idea. It's closer to that person in that moment than perhaps it's ever been before. And the question is, what does it look like to follow Christ in those moments? How do we represent him well in our profession? And how do we see it not just as our job or as a career, but an opportunity to reach out to people who are dealing with the most upsetting, traumatic, worst moments of their life? And that's what we want to talk about today. But before we get started, I want to give these guys an opportunity to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. So, Brother Clay, you want to get us started?
Sure. My name is Clay Nelson. I'm a paramedic. I've been a paramedic for about 2 months now. I was an EMT for 10 years. I live in Longview, Texas, and I worship with the church there, Gregg County Church of Christ. We're a small group, close-knit, but I'm one of the leaders there. And I don't know what all you want to know about me, but that's pretty much me in a snapshot. Me and my wife, Kelsey, just doing what we can for the Lord and trying to make it through to another day.
And I assume that you graduated school and started as a paramedic with everything that you need to know to do the job to perfection, right? Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
All right. Well, glad to have you. Brother Aaron?
Hey, I'm Aaron Batty. I've been a nurse for, I lose count after 10 years. I think it's 12, something like that. And I've been a nurse in the ER for 11 and just worked yesterday, actually. But now I'm just PRN. So that means I just, as needed, really what that means is 3 shifts every 6 weeks. I schedule and take a shift, a 12-hour. Work days now. I started off at nights. That's a conversation if y'all have ever done that. I know y'all have. And I can't do that anymore. My body has told me I can't do that anymore. But I love, like, there's part of it I love and part of it I hate. But I guess I'll leave it at that. The other thing I do full time now is I'm a gospel preacher at the Chapel Grove Church of Christ in Summertown, Tennessee. So that's why I went cut back to PRN.
I actually just took a night position, weekend pack, just to have more time as a preacher myself. But you and I both know what PRN stands for, right?
I've not heard this one. Go ahead.
Probably really never.
I have never worked an extra shift in the 6 years that I've been at this hospital in Columbia, Tennessee. That's one thing I committed to whenever I worked with the church, I said I wouldn't work more than the minimum. So I've been able to hold true to that.
Sure. That's great. Brother Nehemiah.
Yeah, yes, I'm Nehemiah Wall, from close to Stillwater, Oklahoma, kind of out in the country, kind of central Oklahoma. So I've been in EMS for about 4 or 5 years, I guess now. I worked as an EMT for about two, and then have been a paramedic for 2 years now, just about to recertify. So yeah, just about 2 years, and then did a little bit of volunteer firefighting before that. Since I've been eight, I think I was 18 whenever I first joined a volunteer fire department. Um, but yeah, I worship at the congregation in Edmond. But yeah, it's just really, really glad to be on here and talk about this, because I think that the intersection of Christianity and medicine, and I mean, you could throw firefighting in there too, I suppose, but it's something that is really important to do as Christians, to be able to serve your community and kind of be involved in that kind of way. But there's a lot of dangers that come with it too. Something I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I think it's just a really timely conversation to have.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys being on here and being willing to do this. And this has actually been several months kind of in the making. You've got four guys that work very opposing schedules and so on. So it's a special thing just to have all four of us able to cut this time out and knock this out. Brother Aaron Batty also hosts a podcast himself. You want to talk about that for just a second, Aaron?
Oh, I won't drone about it, but it's called the 5-Minute Bible Study Podcast. And I did have a conversation with my brother-in-law a couple of years back. If you're interested on more podcasts of this nature on medicine, he's in pretty high up in leadership in nursing now in Dallas Fort Worth Hospital, and he provides that perspective as well. And we talk a lot about the temptations in nursing practice and just in medicine. So, yeah, go check it out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you ever do check out Aaron's 5-Minute Bible Study podcast, he always has a infomercial on to begin his podcast, and they're usually pretty funny. I don't have anything like that, but I did kind of want to start lighthearted, and so I wonder if you guys might be willing to share kind of a funny patient interaction that you've had. Maybe take a couple minutes and kind of share something like that, if any of you have one off the top of your head.
I can give you
share
one.
one.
Oh, go ahead, Clay.
It doesn't sound funny at the start, but you kind of have to trust the process. Me and my partner, probably 2 years ago, we got called out to a fall with a possibly fractured hip. And those are always, somebody's grandma fell down, and so we walked into the house, and I saw this little girl sitting on the floor, and I started to ask her where her grandma was, as I'm just looking for grandma. Turns out it was the little girl that had fallen. She's 11 years old and had a brittle bone disease. This was her 27th broken bone in
Man.
11 years, and she was a week away from finishing her rehab for breaking her other hip, and tripped over her crutches and broke this hip. And she was in an immense amount of pain. Extremely brave little girl. She has to squeeze my hand every time her muscles would spasm and make that bone hurt. And she had a pencil she was biting down on. But we gave her a bunch of fentanyl, and that maxed out our dose of fentanyl on her, and that didn't touch her pain. So we gave her some ketamine. She's asking for horse tranquilizer. Last time they gave me the horse tranquilizer, and my partner didn't know what that meant. And I said, horse tranquilizer, ketamine. She wants ketamine. And so we maxed her out on ketamine, which, for those people who don't know, really kind of puts you in another world for a while. And for 30 minutes, she was in a subconscious state, like just in another world. Well, she came out right as we were getting to the ER, and she was high as a kite, flirting with nurses, the male nurses that were there, and hollering at nurses across the ER, and all kinds of wild things she was saying. She saw one of them. She's hollering at this nurse from across the way. She says, "You were mean to me last time I was here." She was kind of funny. I will
That's
never
awesome.
forget.
What about you guys? You got anything you want to share? Aaron's about to say, yeah, one time I had this girl come in with brittle bone disease, and
Never had that. I did have, probably my funniest story was not actually about a patient. It's about a nursing orientee that I had. And I had kind of, she was almost done with her orientation. So I was just floating around the ER, just chatting. And there was a paramedic that had a cup of stew from the cafeteria. And it looked just like diarrhea. I mean, it looked like C. diff. It had little nuggets of corn in it. And I was like, you could put that in a biohazard cup and biohazard bag and totally pass that off as a stool sample. And so we come up with a concocted plan of, why don't you, Brittany was the paramedic. I said, Brittany, why don't you plant that on the counter in a biohazard bag and cup? And I'll come by and you dare me to eat it, and we'll know what it is, but they won't. So she did. And Crystal was the nurse I was training. She screamed out, she said, Aaron, did you put this here? And I come out, and long story short, we really dramatized it. We really played it out for about 20 minutes. And finally, she dared me to pay me $100 to eat it. And I put it in my mouth, and then I rushed to the trash can like I was going to throw up. And I thought I did a good job vomiting, and then I turn around and my orientee is legitimately throwing it up in the trash can. And she was pretty mad at me.
That's awesome. Did you get the $100?
No, it was all rigged.
That's awesome. Nehemiah, you got anything to share?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking here. I had a story that came to mind the other day, and it's not really a medical story, to be honest with you, but I was probably only like 18 at the time on a volunteer fire department, and a big fire came out not too far from our house, really, and I was riding with the chief at the time. We were on the way to the fire, and he has a tendency to get a little amped up, and everything was going wrong that could have gone wrong. So he was driving pretty recklessly, to be honest with you. We nearly wrecked a couple times on the way there, and he was cussing up a storm and just going on and on and on and on. And finally, we were sailing down this back country road, and he just stopped and was real quiet for a little bit. I was super shy at the time, so I was just sitting in the passenger seat, like not saying anything. And he just sat there real quiet for a while. And then he was like, Nehemiah, I'm sorry. I know you don't go for cussing. I'll try to do better. And throughout the rest of the call, he really tried. It was a struggle for him, but it was kind of the first time for me. Looking back on it, I thought it was kind of funny to me, but at the time, it was sort of the first wake up call that even if you don't say anything, sometimes people notice stuff. And I was just a shy kid that didn't say anything. But he picked up enough on that to know that I didn't cuss, and he was going to try not to cuss around me. He really tried. He didn't do a very good job of it, but it was it was a really chaotic day. Like we nearly got in some pretty bad situations through the whole day, but there was just that one thing. It was just like a light bulb moment for him, and he was just like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't be cussing right now." And I don't know. That's maybe not a super funny story. Looking back on it, knowing him especially, it was kind of humorous that was the first thing that dawned on him while he had all these other things on his mind and was trying to get to the fire and coordinate all sorts of stuff and was super, super agitated. And then it just dawned on him. He's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be cussing right now.
That's funny. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. If you've been in this field for any amount of time, the stories are endless. We could spend all day here sharing stories, and probably we'll share some more stories throughout the rest of the podcast. But there was one day, there is me and my partner, and him and I are good friends, and we used to get called out to this fella who would fall all the time, and he had a lift chair. And he'd go to get out of the lift chair and just slide down the lift chair. And he's never hurt, just needed help up. And bless his heart, him and his wife both should have been in a nursing home or assisted care facility of some sort. They shouldn't have been home living by themselves. And it was about 3:00 in the morning. And me and my partner get woke up with a 911 call to go help this guy get up. He had fallen again. And they said over the dispatch information, he's not hurt. He's just, he went down soft, just needs help up. And we both knew who it was. We knew what happened. And So we get there, and his brother, this is an older guy, and his brother was there helping take care of him and his wife. And he let me in the door, me and my partner, and he's like, "Yeah, come on, he's over here just hanging out on the ground." And he said he just got up to go to the bathroom and slipped out of his chair, which not abnormal at all. And so as I'm walking across the house, I see him laying there on the floor next to his chair, and uh, and it's like 3 a.m, so he had fallen back asleep. And so I went to tap him, and I forget what his name was now, but just I was like, "Tom," I was like, "That's a funny place to take a nap." Tom, Tom. Yeah, I'm sternal rubbing him, and I go to feel a pulse. He's got no pulse. And this guy had died within just minutes of us getting there. Wasn't related to the fall, not necessarily. I mean, he really did just fall. And so we didn't take anything inside with us because we've been here a million times. We just had our clipboard to get a signed refusal. And so I feel that he doesn't have a pulse. And I told my partner, I was like, "Hey, go get all the stuff." So he goes out, and I start CPR. And his wife is there, and she's like, "Well, what's wrong with him?" And so I was like, his heart stopped. We're going to try to get it going again." And so my partner's out going to get everything. And meanwhile, his wife's like, "Well, he's on hospice. He's a DNR." And she gets the DNR paperwork. And so I stop CPR, and I'm just sitting on the couch talking to the wife. And obviously she's, kind of upset. And I was talking to her, and in comes my partner like a pack mule. He's got the ventilator, the Lucas, the jump bag, the cardiac monitor, like walking in with everything. And then he sees me sitting there on the couch, and I kind of go like this, and he's like, and then turns around and just walks right back out with all the stuff. It was absolutely hilarious. Sad that the guy died, but it was just a crazy turn of events to go from lift assist, no injury, to Emmys on the way to the scene kind of situation. But unfortunately, we deal with death and
I feel
dying
like
a lot.
I chose the wrong
Go
story.
ahead.
Y'all chose really dark stories.
I could have told you about the time that this guy was high as a kite and ended up trying to break into a house and took off running from the cops in a cornfield in handcuffs, wearing just his underwear. That was pretty funny. But lots of funny stories. I'm sure we'll share some more. So one thing, I've got some questions to kind of guide our conversation today, and that's kind of what I kind of hope to do is just move our way through these questions, and you guys just speak up as you have anything to share. But one thing is, I found the opportunity to be able to use our job, our position that we're in with people in the moments of their life to reach out to them spiritually. They're going through dark times, traumatic times, and these are times that even people who may have never thought about eternity or thought about God are now faced with the decision or faced with the reality that there's something greater than them. There's a need for God, a need for making sure that you know where you're going when life is over. Have y'all ever experienced that in your roles in your careers where you've had that realization too, that there's, this job is a mission field for the Lord? Just speak up.
Yeah, I've definitely. There was one situation that was coming to mind. It wasn't really like an end of life. You encounter that sometimes in end of life type settings where somebody's getting to the end of their life and they're starting to really think seriously about things. But I had a situation a couple years ago. I was taking a girl to the hospital, and she was trying to transition. And so she had had a whole bunch of surgeries and all kinds of stuff, and was suffering from some complications from that, to be honest with you. And of course, those calls are always the difficult ones because you're like, they're always worried about being misgendered, and no matter what you do, you always mess up. And like, not that I'm going to comply with what they want me to do, but sometimes you just try to avoid having that conversation and using pronouns and stuff. I always wonder the best way to approach that, but you end up making them mad sometimes. And so I remember just sitting in the captain's seat at the head of the cot where I wasn't really talking to her, And I thought, well, I'm just going to, work on my report, mind my own business, and just keep from getting in trouble here. I'm taking care of her like I'm doing the best that I can. And then I thought, well, what's the point of me just sitting here? Why don't I go back and sit next to her on the bench, just in case she wants to visit? And I went back and sat next to her on the bench, and she had her phone out. She was listening to a sermon on it. And so we got visiting, and we had a really good conversation. I ended up inviting her to church and stuff. And she told me, like, right before we got to the hospital, that she was a little bit scared. Like, she was wondering, sometimes she wonders if she made the right decision, and like if God is going to judge her for that. And unfortunately, our conversation got cut kind of short, but it reminded me of the need to, sometimes in situations like that, you have people who are doing stupid things with their body, making all kinds of decisions that to me like are blatantly, like, obviously horrible decisions. And it's easy to just kind of judge them for that and then try to just keep your distance. But it was just a good reminder that no matter who your patient is, no matter who the person is, there's, no matter what they've done, there's still a person behind that. And a lot of times there's a hurting person behind that. And each situation, even ones like that I have a tendency to just try to keep my distance from, they have a story, and they have a problem. And God is the answer to that. And sometimes people don't want to see that, but more often than you might realize, people are a little bit more open to that than you might think. But it was kind of a wake up call for me, because I was trying to just kind of do my own thing, keep my distance, but realize that every person that you encounter can be an opportunity.
And I think what you just said, is I think sometimes, and perhaps this is something that many of us struggle with from time to time. We have this picture of what the ideal convert may look like, or the ideal Christian may look like. Jesus himself talked about in Mark chapter 2, and I think in Luke as well, that those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. And so you take people like
Hmm.
what you're just talking about, they're confused, they're struggling, they're hurt, they're people like that maybe following through some of these destructive habits or destructive tendencies to cover up a lack of direction that can truly only come from God. So I'm glad you made that realization. Glad you went and sat by her. You other guys have anything to share with this about realizing your job's a mission field?
I was glad that Nehemiah shared that story because I had heard that and I was hoping to hear it uh, from your own mouth. I heard it from your brother, but in my experience, I've invited a lot of people to church that were patients and talked, taking advantage of some of those life threatening moments. But the ones that have really um, led to real conversations and follow up were my coworkers, and especially when I was working full time. And it seems like when you go through some of those traumatic experiences, especially a lot with the same people, you build a bond that you really can't even build with. Sometimes, I mean, this is just the truth. Sometimes you don't build that same bond with Christians just because you're going to church with them all the time. There's something about
Mm-hmm.
going through high high risk situations that builds a special bond, as much as that's odd to say. And so that's really led to some fruitful conversations and relationships.
So we've been talking about realizing that our career field is, sometimes we're able to use it as a mission field to reach people about Jesus in the dark times of their life. And these are times that people are faced with decisions of removing people from life support, removing loved ones from life support, things like that. What about a moment that made eternity feel real to you? We're Christians. We go to church, we read the Bible and things like that. Have you ever had a patient, a call that you've been on that made that real to you? Clay, you have anything in mind?
I can't really think of anything in specific, but seeing people of all ages in their worst hour, and many times, on their deathbed, moments from death, really makes you hyper aware of how close eternity can be. I've seen patients my own age who were experiencing life-threatening heart cardiac events or things like that, and that really makes you aware of how how mortal you are sometimes.
I had a guy one time, it was the very first cardiac arrest I'd ever been on. And it was a guy at work, normal day at work, and he went to go use a piece of machinery that he hadn't used before, and it pulled him into basically he got crushed with a bunch of gravel. And we pulled him out of the gravel, but he was already gone. But I started CPR on him, trying to get him back. And I just remember looking down at him. This guy's 30 years old. After the fact, later on, I went on to learn that he had been married for 5 years. At the time, my wife and I were married 5 years. He was a big guy, had dark, brown hair and a beard. And I just remember, it was just a normal day of work for him. And I just remember as I was looking down at him, doing CPR on him, like, man, like, could have been me. This guy looks just like me, And yeah, what about you, Nehemiah? Any time that made eternity feel real to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different times I remember that kind of really sinking in. But like Clay mentioned, a lot of times just the fact that you're surrounded by death and sickness, and it kind of turns into your normal sometimes. But then whenever you kind of click out of that for a little bit, you realize just how easy life can go. Sometimes just how quickly that can happen. And you just look around and it just seems like all the time that's what you're surrounded with: hospice patients. Sometimes people think about EMS as, all the kind of the cool lights and sirens, and you're out on the streets getting gunshot wounds and stabbings. And there's those for sure. But a lot of times it's just a lot of going to nursing homes, a lot of older people that are on hospice, just a lot of spending time with people that are at the end of their life. And there is one call that really stuck with me. It was actually when I was going through paramedic school. So about 2 years ago, there was a girl, I think she was about 13 at the time, 13 or 14, and she had had all sorts of medical issues her whole life. And she was on hospice at home. And we got called out there. It was just a messy call. The whole thing was super messy. And they wanted us to transport her to the hospital for end of life, which was kind of weird. The whole situation was weird. And we got there and she was just like guppy breathing, like she was literally just about to go. And nobody could find her DNR because, like, we knew that she probably wasn't even going to make it to the hospital. And the hospice nurse didn't even have the DNR. Family couldn't find the DNR. And finally, while we were trying to work through that, she did die. And like she went into cardiac arrest. And we made it clear, like, we have to have the DNR or we're going to have to start compressions. And nobody could find it. So finally, we moved the patient out to the ambulance because the patient's siblings were in the house. It was just a mess of a call. And about that time, they found the DNR. And then the hospice nurse just left. She was one of the worst hospice nurses I've ever seen. There's amazing hospice nurses, but she was not one of them. And then just seeing that whole, like, spending time there, because then we had a body in the ambulance, and we finally found the DNR, the family did. And so we're just sitting there waiting for the ME. So you're sitting there we were like 2 or 3 hours just sitting there with this 13-year-old girl in the back of the ambulance and with family and everything else. And man, it just really, at the time, one of my siblings was about that age. And it really kind of brings home how fragile life is sometimes. And that girl, she was getting close to it her whole life. And then just seeing the family's reaction. For me, in some sense, it was just another day at work. But for them, it was probably the worst day of their life. And they handled it amazingly well. But like, all the siblings were obviously having a terrible time. The mom just collapsed in the yard crying because it was just so much emotional stress and strain on her. But yeah, it just really brings home how close eternity is sometimes, even at a young age like that. There's just so many things that we're surrounded with that a lot of people are protected from, fortunately. But it's kind of a blessing and a curse that we see that. And it just really brings home how close that is.
Yeah, my wife, I've been in the field for 7 years now, and my wife knows, there's things I share with my kids, my wife and kids. There's things that I share with my wife, and then there's things that, I kind of keep to myself at home. And usually those are the times that, there have been weapons involved, or, times that I left the call and was like, wow, I'm glad I made it out of that. Those are the ones I don't always tell my wife about. But yeah, well, in these calls that we're talking about, these patient interactions, these moments have a way of staying with you. You're like, you can finish that report, you can complete that chart, you can go clean the rig, clean the room, but some of these things, they don't leave your mind. What's one patient or one call that you'll never forget, and why? Aaron, you have anything to share?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't, be on the ER side, so not a call per se, but the ones that really stick with me are the abuse situations. And I just had an abuse situation a few months back that really still with me. But years ago, when I was in the trauma center at Tulsa, I worked level 2 trauma center there, St. John's, and we would have, man, it seemed like a shooting or a stabbing. If you work 3 days a week, you'd get at least one that week. And we had a kid that was brought in with 10-year-old who had been tied up in the kitchen with her sister by her mom. And she set the kitchen on fire, and the younger kid got away somehow and went to the neighbors, who called 911. And the 10-year-old was stuck in the kitchen. But the mom had not only tied her up and set it on fire, she had stabbed her a lot. And so you have 3 different nurses on a trauma bay, along with all the other ancillary staff. And my job as the nurse was to assess the body. She was alive. She was intubated. We were ventilating her. She was, going to be transferred to the ICU. But until then, we had to make sure our X's and Y's were crossed off. And I had to count all of her stab wounds. And her mom had stabbed her 144 times. Not all of those were like deep stab wounds. Some of them were. But, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And it was just incredible. So the next morning, she was on the news. They had actually found the mom with the kid in some abandoned parking lot in Tulsa. And that was one, I was like, wow, that actually ended up on the news, the patient we took care of, which isn't a cool thing. But that was kind of the first time that had happened.
And yeah, those are tough times for sure. And I don't know if I missed it or not. I assume she didn't make it?
On those situations, I just, in order to maintain patient privacy and all, I just don't really investigate. I suppose it was a flip of the coin. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's too bad. Clay, Nehemiah, y'all have anything to share?
The only thing I can think of is the first arrest I ever had, and nothing nearly as traumatic or anything as
Cardiac arrest, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And it's just a guy that was out with his brother, younger guy, not real old, out shooting pool at the bar and dropped dead at the pool table. And it was the first time I'd ever worked an arrest. That kind of sticks with you for some reason. But I mean, there's a lot of them throughout my career that'll stick with me. But
yeah, Nehemiah, you have anything like that you've experienced?
Yeah, there's definitely been some. I'll be honest with you. It seems like sometimes your mind almost works in a way where certain calls you definitely remember, and then there's others you would expect to remember, and it's almost like it blocks them out. But yeah, there was a car wreck across the river. It's like not far from our house. I get to work EMS kind of in our whole area, and it's a rural area, so like sometimes people in the area, and stuff happens super close to home. But there was a car wreck. It was like a head-on collision, and I got there. I was with the fire department, and I got there like in my personal vehicle because I was just a couple miles from there when it happened. There was a 19-year-old kid in his car that had gotten hit and killed. I think he got killed instantaneously, probably. The people that were there said he still, was breathing a little bit when they got there, but it's probably just kind of reflex. But every time after a call, it was a pretty typical call. Like it was, he was dead on arrival. There wasn't anything to do really. But it got me thinking about, he had like his phone was right there, and then he also had his oh man, I'm drawing a blank, his um the diabetic
Glucometer.
little thing in his pocket, and both of them were like falling out of his pocket. And so like he might have been on his phone, it might have been his fault, or he might have had a diabetic episode and swerved into oncoming traffic. And just being a 19-year-old kid, one of my brothers was 19 at the time. I ended up having a conversation with him about it because we were like literally driving by that road, and you see, like when you drive through there, you see all the oil spills on the road and the track marks from the wreck and everything every time you drive past. And whenever I was leaving that call, I always stop and kind of think after the fact, like put myself in the patient's family's shoes just to kind of keep it real, because it's easy to get calloused from that kind of stuff. And I naturally do that without even thinking about it. And I was just like, what if that was one of my brothers? And then I have a brother that's 19. I was like, oh, that's, I gotta,
Hmm.
you can't dwell on that too much, but those calls stick with you, but it leads to good conversations and good thoughts too, just to realize, like I was talking to my brothers later when we drove past there, it was like, there's a wreck right here. A 19-year-old kid got killed. And it might have been his fault. Like he might have made a stupid decision, or it might have just been what happened because of his medical history and stuff. But the important thing is just to remember that eternity is real. And even if you're not a healthy 19-year-old, you click your fingers and be gone. But
Yeah,
yeah, those calls definitely do stick with you.
absolutely. And when you see life and death up close, like we do, and others in our career field here, it changes the way that you see it. You start to, like you said, become callous to it. And there are times that I may make comments to my wife or things like that, and she reminds me that I've maybe become slightly calloused in that regard. And but it also changes, in my opinion, it changes the way that you think about opportunity. For me, it's changed the way that I see people. And when I look at people, I look at them more fragile than I used to. I used to think that, you get somebody in an emergency to the hospital and they'll save them. Whereas now, because of the education that I've had, and the calls I've been on, I understand more about the human body and what it can and can't recover from. And obviously with God, all things are possible. And I still believe in the power of prayer. But, if there's certain things that you don't expect a body to be able to withstand. And especially once you work with certain doctors and certain nurses, your faith in certain doctors and certain nurses maybe aren't what they used to be. And actually, I remember I used to have some friends over from school, and we'd have study sessions when I was in school, and even now I'll have coworkers over and we'll go shoot guns or hang out, things like that. And my wife's like, I used to think that when you called 911, a bunch of highly trained professionals show up, and now I just realized that they're your buddies. They're the same goofballs that you hang out with. But anyway, it also changes, or it opens up doors for conversations that might not happen anywhere else. And that kind of leads me to the question: do you think people are more open to spiritual conversations in moments of crisis? Aaron, you want to speak to that?
It's I I guess experientially versus objectively. I think objectively, absolutely. Um, and the crisis is a general word, so I'm thinking, my mind goes immediately to life and death. Somebody's died, and you're talking to the family, and the situations. It's very difficult to ask the person, "Do you believe in God? Are you thinking about eternity right now?" Like obviously you're just trying to plant a seed to try to, maybe they'll take your offer to talk more later. Um, I've had patients who have found my Facebook profile and messaged me after they had severe sepsis. We rushed them to the OR and they ended up surviving, and they somehow got a hold of me. And the first time that happened, I was like, wow, kind of creepy, but also amazing. So but the conversations don't go anywhere. And I don't know if that's because, now they're fine now. In those situations, I think that people are definitely more open. I just haven't found the way to bridge the gap, at least in the nursing setting, to really get anywhere yet. And that's not to say that, you don't keep planting those seeds and maybe you will one day. It's just cool that I've had even one opportunity where a patient found me, and maybe that'll keep happening.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Clay, Nehemiah? Do you have anything to share on that idea, that question?
In James chapter 1, we're told to count it all joy when you meet trials, because they'll bring about testing of your faith will bring about steadfastness. And I think that even when people don't have faith, these brink of death type situations really make them think about their own mortality and what may or may not be after, and really starts to make them question things. And so I think it really does open a lot of doors to in our profession for us to be able to talk to people about that. And then it's often seems like even people who'd never consider it, like Nehemiah's story, people who've never really considered God or eternity at all start to question it when we walk through the door, so to speak. So,
Absolutely. Nehemiah, you got anything you want to share?
Yeah, my experience has been that a lot of people are fairly open, but I try to kind of take the profession. I was remembering whenever I first got into EMS, and I was shy and tried to just kind of like I wanted to do a good job, I wanted to fit in, I wanted people to not really notice me. And while that's a good thing on a certain sense, it's not a good thing spiritually. Like that leads to just not being very open about your faith sometimes. And I try to take a very open approach now where I'm like pleasantly obvious about the fact that I'm a Christian. I think that comes from like even in Romans 12, where it talks about being a living sacrifice. It's a lifestyle, and people should see that in everything that you do. And honestly, for me, it has opened up conversations with coworkers more than anybody. And I've had hour long, like multiple hour long conversations with coworkers in the middle of the night whenever we're driving down some dark road somewhere, very productive ones too. But I've had it with patients as well. Not that they've led to like actual Bible studies, but just to be able to, I guess my approach is just to spend time with them, ask questions, listen, and show that I really care. And they normally will open up a little bit with you, even if you just have them for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. And by the end of it, sometimes I'll just ask them, like, "Are you a religious person?" Especially after they've told me all the, the trouble that's been going on, and their wife just died, and they have this diagnosis and that thing. And you'd be surprised how many people are like, "Yeah, I'm a religious person," and so I'll just ask them if I can pray for them after the fact. People appreciate that most of the time. Like sometimes people might not. But I had a lady the other day, and she was like, "Yeah, please pray for me." And I said, "Well, I'll definitely pray for you whenever I leave." And then she was like, "Can you pray for me right now?" And so we stopped there in the ambulance, and and I was able to say a prayer for her. And a lot of those, like I try to protect patient privacy, and I'm not going to be following up with people, and I don't put myself out there where they like obviously know who I am, but I don't mind just being there as a friend, just being there as a human being with them, and being kind of pleasantly obvious about that. And there's just no reason to hide it. So I just try to allow it to. I want people to see Jesus through me. I don't want them to see Nehemiah. I want them to see Jesus. And if they can see that, sometimes it leads to people actually opening their doors more than you might expect sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, the idea about your coworkers, because I think that each of you guys will agree that, for it to be a profession of so many people that want to help others, there's a lot of our coworkers collectively who need a lot of help themselves, and the help that Jesus can offer. There's a lot of my coworkers, and I'm sure yours too, that substance abuse, broken homes, broken marriages, just it almost seems like guys like you and me are the minority in our career field sometimes. And yeah, sometimes it's not just the patients that, obviously in what we're talking about today, we're talking a lot about the patients that we interact with, but sometimes it's the coworkers, and it's the people that we spend 12 to 24 hours a day with, the people that we're interacting with when we're not on calls, when we're sitting around the station or sitting around the nurse's station or whatever the case is, having those conversation after conversations. Those are awesome opportunities to try to reach hurting people. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's amazing how many conversations come up when you're stuck in for 12 hours, you're stuck in the space the size of your guest bathroom with somebody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I actually have this card that I came up with called the scatter card, and it's just a postcard full of questions that you can ask somebody to start a spiritual conversation with, and I usually try to keep one with me. And there's one day I had a partner, this is a while back, and we hadn't been partners very long, and we were leaving the hospital. We had dropped a patient off, and it was a long distance transport. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask him one of these questions. And I'm sitting there, and I asked him a question because I'm like, we've got 45 minutes. He's a captive audience, and asked him one of the questions. And just asking him that one question started a 45-minute conversation, or monologue, I should say. He was just going on and on about, I didn't even know if he was really a religious person. And he ended up telling me all about his upbringing and how his aunt took him to church, and this is what he thinks about God now. And now we've been having Bible studies since then. And you just like you said, here you're in a space the size of a bathroom, and they can't really go anywhere. So take the chance. You never know what'll happen. But so we talk about these moments of reaching out to people and the patients that we interact with, and now we're kind of talking about coworkers a little bit, and that's great. These moments, I think we all can agree, they don't often happen by accident. They happen because we've intentionally decided to try to reach out to somebody with some kind words, or try to reach out to them to show them the love of Jesus Christ. But if we're going to be effective, we have to be intentional about those opportunities. And that, to me, in my mind, that starts with the attitude that we go into the shift with. Like, are we starting our day looking for those opportunities or being intentional? And so I'd ask the question, and Nehemiah, I'll start with you. How do you mentally and spiritually prepare before walking into a shift?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because used to I didn't do anything. Like, I just showed up and just started my shift. And that ended up having a lot of negative spiritual ramifications for me, as well as just how my day went, the opportunities that God might put before me. I didn't take advantage of those very well. But now I try to, days that I'm on shift, I like to have somewhat of a morning routine just to get I know that's simple, but just to get my day started off kind of right. And then, to be honest with you, whenever I pull up at work, I like to get there early enough that I can just stop and say a prayer before I walk in, and jump on the ambulance. And I really think that that has helped. Just to, I mean, I can't say for sure that I have more opportunities now than whenever I didn't do that. But for me personally, it gives me something to kind of ground me, because I think it's kind of twofold. There's a lot of dangers that you walk into. I was reminded of it whenever Aaron was talking a minute ago about how close you get with your coworkers, because you go through all kinds of stuff with them. Like, you see all kinds of stuff with them. You guys get a flow together. And that's a really good thing. Like, it builds a bond with somebody that you can use to help influence them for Christ. But you're also getting really close to somebody that's probably not a really good person, like morally in a lot of ways. And so it's just something you have to be very, very intentional and careful about. And so I tried to approach it with a mentality and actually pray and ask God to help me keep that mentality of showing up in a way where people can see Jesus through me, and so that God would be glorified in everything that I do. And then, of course, that I can actually show up and take care of the patients that I'm responsible for physically in the way that they need. But for me, a lot of that really does come back to the environment that you're in and the coworkers that you work with. I think people underestimate, and I underestimated whenever I first got into EMS, just how corrupt that environment is sometimes. And it gives you an opportunity, like even just a little bit of light shines really bright when you're in that environment. But you just have to be honest with yourself about the impact that that can have on you sometimes. So yeah, that's a little bit of my morning routine, but I kind of constantly update it, to be honest with you, just to make sure that I show up and I'm like clicked in. I'm tuned in whenever I walk into shift.
Absolutely. Clay, you got anything to share?
Um, I'm very similar to Nehemiah in that, you know, I used to not really do anything, but more recently, uh, in recent years, it's been a daily prayer that I'll be ready for the shift. You know, I give all those traumas and everything that we deal with, I give it all to God, let Him handle it rather than me having to bear it on my own. Um, and I ask God to be with me in my shift, that I will have a readiness of mind and be able to make the right decisions to affect my patients and physically in the right way, and be able to make those decisions quickly enough to make a difference. And my prayer is always that I will not shine my own light, but that I'll reflect my light, or reflect God's light um, in those people's lives, as I may be the only glimmer of light that they ever see. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of my how I prepare for a shift.
Yeah,
Same,
that's great.
very much the same, Nehemiah.
Aaron, how about you? I mean, I know it's 3 shifts a month.
Yeah.
What's your process look like for preparation for those?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I fasted and prayed and gave like some sacrifice to God before every shift, like Job, you know. But only in the last year or two, I would say the last year and a half, probably in that time frame, have I made it a regular practice of praying for my patients before and especially after the shift, because afterward you're thinking about them before you don't even know you're taking it. So I'm not going to say I do that before every shift, even, because I hate going to work so much that I'm just, I'm slugging through the morning. You get up at 5 a.m. and you're just trying to wake up and stuff. And I'm not going to lie, I don't always say a prayer specifically for my patients or my shift. But I can say in the last year and a half, I've made that definitely more of an intentional effort. And and then after my shift, especially knowing who those patients are, you can pray for them by name to God. And everything that y'all said, I can't really add anything to it. But this is something that's like haphazard for me. I don't have like a routine. And I appreciate you making me think more about this, because it's something that I can dwell on, especially at the beginning of a new year, to get more of a routine as I go to work.
And really, praying is obviously, I believe there's power in prayer, and I, similar to Nehemiah, and I like to say prayer before my shift, and also for myself, because I know how easy it is to fall into those. You're surrounded by people that are involved in immorality and conversations that shouldn't be happening and things like that, and it's a struggle to not let yourself get pulled into that. And that's one of the things that I try to pray for in my prayers before I go to work, is that God helps me to remember who I am, and that those are not conversations that I should be delighting in. And something that I have to remind myself of is sometimes even just being silently sitting there, can still be seen as delighting in them. I don't want to give the impression that I'm okay with what's going on, and that's something that I try to keep in mind as well. But it goes beyond. Praying is great, and we should pray, absolutely, praying for our patients especially, but we also have to have discernment in what we say. Like I think a couple of you guys had alluded to, trying to talk to your patients, and I've been there as well, where you want to bring up spiritual things with your patients, but you have to be tender, gentle sometimes with how to do that. we need to know when to speak. We need to know when to listen, and sometimes we need to know when to just simply be present and pray that that door will open up for us. How do you know when somebody is open to spiritual conversations? Aaron, you want to speak to that?
Well, um, you know, if it's one of those situations, I'll put it like this. The other day, I had a patient who just was diagnosed with a lung mass in the ER. I don't even think it was why they were there. I think it was incidental. We did a CT scan of their chest. Oh, lo and behold, you got a lung mass. You need to see an oncologist. And so, in those situations, I think about myself. You could just tell in his eye he was crying, and a pretty rough older man, I would say, who you look at and you think this guy may or may not want a prayer right now, but I've got to think that he would appreciate it. So I offered to pray with him, and his wife was very much welcoming. He was like, "Yeah, whatever. If you want to do that, it makes you feel better." But so we prayed, and I could tell it had an effect on him. And so, what I do is I carry cards for the church with the address on and all, and I just give it to them. And if I see any type of opening like that, and I'm just using my intuition, then I might ask them if they want to talk about it. But more than anything, I just say a prayer with them if they are willing, ask them, and then give them my card. And I don't have the capacity in the nursing world. I have 4 patients at a time. And yesterday, I didn't eat and I didn't drink the whole shift. And I probably sat down for 10 minutes. And that's over 12 hours. So, I don't have the ability to sit down and have a long conversation because I got too much to do. So that's my opportunity to try to plant a seed there and just, give them a card. So that's a little bit different, perhaps. If you're sitting in the back of an ambulance, maybe you have more opportunity over an extended period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Clay, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on that question? How do you know when somebody's open to a spiritual conversation?
Well, I mean, a lot of times there'll be clues, like you go in their house and they'll have religious art or whatever on their walls, or a cross necklace, or a t-shirt that says, I see a lot of times we see women that have t-shirts with scripture on the front of them or something like that. And that's usually a pretty good clue that they're willing to talk about those things. Um, but even sometimes I'll just ask, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in eternity? Things like that. Um, or like I work in a very rural system, so unlike Aaron, I often have 40 to 45 minutes with one single patient, and we just I talk to my patients a lot. And like I had one lady a while back. We were headed to it was a transfer, actually, going to the trauma center in Shreveport. She had been involved in a car wreck and had a renal artery dissection. And we were administering blood products the whole way, just trying to keep her blood pressure up enough to keep her awake. And the whole time she's saying, I think I'm dying. I think I'm dying. I think about 17, 20 times she said that. And, in our field, that's not something you ever want to hear. Uh, but I just started talking to her, trying to distract her from what was going on, and asked her about what she was doing that day. That, where was she at? She was like 86 years old or something like that. And I was like, where were you headed? Uh, and she's telling me she was out doing things with her church group. And I said, oh, where do you go to church? And she said, oh, the Church of Christ in Marshall. I said, oh, I'm Church of Christ too. And she's like, oh, well, where do you go? So we started talking about that. She uh, ended up offered to pray with her and pray for her and everything. And she was very acceptant of that. And she was very scared. And usually when somebody's very scared, I'll be willing to ask them and bring it up, because sometimes you can find peace in just talking about things like that. So
I usually use the line, it looks like you're hurting. I can give you some fentanyl, but Jesus can give you eternal life. And
How's that work?
Remember that.
Nehemiah, how about you? You have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, yes. I'll be honest with you. A lot of times, I feel like I play it kind of by ear, just like you kind of gauge after you've been with the patient for 5-10 minutes. You can kind of gauge how open they might be. And one of the big things that I always want to make sure that I preface it with is there's a saying that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And you can't fully do that in 5 minutes, but you can do that more than you think you can. Just to listen to somebody, let them tell you how they're hurting, let them tell you what's been going on, and show your sympathy, and just actually listen and spend time with them. And sometimes that's the best medicine that somebody needs. Sometimes they don't need fentanyl. Sometimes they don't need fluids. Sometimes they don't need anything. They just need somebody that's there with them. And even from a medical perspective, that's my job, like, is to just be there with somebody as much as I can be. But you can kind of gauge how open somebody is. And then, like Clay was saying, when people are at those moments where they feel like they're dying, I had a lady not too long ago, and she was in a lot of pain, and it was a transfer. And when we got close to the facility we were taking her to, she started asking me those questions. She was like, "Do you think I'm going to die?" And I was like, "Well, I don't necessarily think you are. Like, I feel like you probably still have a lot of life in front of you, but I'm super honest with people, and I just shoot them straight that we never know how long our life's going to be. The typical answer is just to say, well, we're doing everything we can for you, blah, blah, blah. And you can do that too, but you want to reassure them that you're doing the best, but that you never know how long life will be. Like, I could die. I told her I could die in 10 minutes, or I might live another 100 years, and you might die in the next 10 minutes, or you might live a lot longer. But the important thing is that we are right with the Lord before we go to eternity. And she really calmed down after that. Like, she really relaxed, which that's kind of an ominous thing in and of itself. But I was just sort of hopeful that it was just because I think she really had some peace of mind after that. And she stopped and she was kind of tearing up, and she thanked me for it. And we dropped her off at the hospital, and I didn't really think much of the call. And a couple weeks later, we were back up on that floor, and a nurse saw me, and she stopped me, and she was like, "You were the one that brought that lady in the other day, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "She died about 2 hours after you dropped her off." And I was like, man, I really didn't expect that. But you
Yeah.
just never know when somebody is right there at the very end. And I don't know what her spiritual standing was, but I can at least be thankful that I had the opportunity to have that type of conversation with her.
Absolutely. I had a one time, and I've not always been as open with my faith as I should, and it should have been. And that's something that, you just learn from the past and try to do better in the future. But we had one time, I worked in a rural hospital EMS system, and it was a basic transfer to a bigger hospital about an hour away, BLS transfer. And it was for a lady with a GI bleed, but she was stable, and they just wanted to get her down there just for a surgical consult, so it wasn't anything acute, anything crazy. Well, anyway, we were wheeling her out to the ambulance, and my partner, love him to death. I'm still good friends with him. He's a guy in his 50s, and just literally became an EMT just to help out. Like, he's got a career. He's doing good in life. Just wanted to help his community. Well, anyway, we're wheeling her out. We're passing the bathroom, and she says, "Hey, can I use the bathroom before we get in the ambulance?" And so she's in the bathroom doing her thing, and my partner, he was asking me questions about because his transfer. I was going to be driving. It was a BLS transfer, and he's like, "So I get vitals every 10 to 15 minutes, right? And I need to call, when I'm 15 minutes before the hospital and give a report to the nurse and this, that, and the other." And well, anyway, as we're standing there outside the bathroom, the call light outside the bathroom goes off. And I was like, okay. And so I unlock the door and open it, and she's slumped down beside the toilet. There's blood everywhere. And I was like, what in the world happened in here? And so quickly realized that it had something to do with her GI issue. And so she's barely got a palpable blood pressure. You can barely feel a pulse. And so we get her up onto the cot, and I go to go find the doctor. We're in a rural critical access hospital, and he came over, and he's like, "Look, she's already been accepted down there. They're waiting for her to potentially do the surgery." He's like, "We can bring her back in and give her blood, but she may be losing blood faster than we can put it in. She needs to get there to get this fixed. And there were no helicopters flying because of weather. So we decided after just a minute of figuring it out, we were just going to take her and do the best we could. And so we're getting her in the ambulance, and I'm getting her hooked up to the cardiac monitor and things like that. And bless his heart, my partner's like, "Is this still my patient?" Her blood pressure's 60/30, and I'm like, "No, it's mine." And so I get her on some medicine to Levophed, get her blood pressure up, and got her on cardiac monitoring, got fluids that I'm pressure infusing, and doing all the things. And we're about 20 minutes out, and the same thing that I think it was Clay had mentioned. She looks up at me and she says, "I think I'm gonna die." And I remember in school being told, if somebody tells you that, believe them. And so anyway, and there's really nothing more I could do, to be honest. I called the hospital and let them know we're barely keeping her blood pressure where it should be. She's maxed out on Levophed. She was in bad shape. And she asked me, she looked at me, and she was talking to me at this point, and she's like, "Should I be praying right now?" And I was trying to keep her calm because I wanted to keep her, trying to keep her calm, be reassuring, and I'm like, I was like, prayer's always a good thing. But yeah, that was one of those patients that in hindsight, I wish I would have maybe, it was obvious that she believed in God. It was obvious that she was scared. And I've always regretted not talking to her more about her soul in that moment. Granted, we got her there. She did good. And last I heard, they got it fixed, but that's been several years ago. But yeah, it's definitely something that we have to be intentional about. We have to go into it using, like I said, discernment, and be intentional, and, pray that we find people that are ready to hear it. Prayer is often, talking about prayer, that's often my go-to. If nothing else, it's kind of non-threatening. It doesn't really matter what your convictions are. If you believe in God, pretty well every denominational group, every belief system believes in prayer. And that's something that I've found that can kind of open a door and be a non-threatening way to bring up Jesus, bring up God, without making them feel pushed into a corner. What's an appropriate way, do you guys think, to offer prayer in our settings? Nehemiah, you want to say something to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if I have a cut and dried answer. Like, this is exactly how you approach that. A lot of it, you just really kind of have to be able to read the situation and know, at least get an idea. You don't know, but to get an idea, maybe what the best way and best time is to offer that. Normally, though, like if you build a little bit of rapport with the patient and you get the idea that they have some level of trust and they have some level of understanding that you care, especially if they've expressed that they have a problem, like expressed something deeper than just like what's obvious. A lot of emotional scars, a lot of trauma that people carry around with them, a lot of things that I can't do. Like as a paramedic, I don't have the tools to fix those problems. And just offering prayer is normally something people aren't, like you said, it's normally not something that people are opposed to. It's not something that is offensive to anybody. And just being able to not say, "I'm going to pray for you," but just say, "Hey, can I pray for you?" People normally are very appreciative of that. And a lot of times that opens a lot of doors. Just being able to, especially like abuse situations or people that are carrying, I'm not talking about like minors and things like that, but like there's a lot of people who just live in relationships that are abusive, and they get addicted to that. Like they really do. They just get trapped in those kind of settings, and being able to just offer something beyond what they have experienced over and over and over, a little bit of care, the desire to pray for somebody to give them an opportunity, and then to just ask them if they have a support system. And if they don't have a support system, that's something that's important, like even just for their for their emotional health and well-being. And then to offer the fact that, church is a good a good support system. Just ask if they have a church family. A lot of times, I think asking questions is the best way to open doors and kind of pull people out a little bit rather than just invading their space, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I actually found one of my go-to questions that I'll ask people. I agree with you. I've over the last couple years, I have transitioned a lot of my evangelistic efforts to just questions. And it was not too long ago that I realized that that was a lot of what Jesus did, was ask questions. But one of the questions that I'll ask my patients and patients' families, in fact, not too long ago, I had a cardiac arrest situation, and the family of the lady was there, and we're obviously distressed. And I my go-to question is, I'll ask people, are y'all people of faith? And most people will either say, well, most people, in fact, I don't know that I've not had anybody I've asked that question to that have said no. And because most people consider themselves Christians, most people, a lot of people consider themselves Christians, believe in God or believe in something. And obviously, there's people that fall out of those categories. I just have not come upon anybody that has at least made that known. But I'll ask them, are you people of faith? And they'll say yes. I'll say, can I pray with you? And we'll say a prayer. And I use in my prayers, and I mean it. It's not just for show. It's sincere. I'll ask God that He'll help use this situation to draw this family closer to Him. And I've not had anybody that has wanted to obey the gospel or anything like that as the result of that. But I hope that it stays with them, and I hope that they think about that time and that they spent in prayer with me. And you never know what the future holds. All we can do is sow seeds. I've had a couple of patients that I've followed up with, not intentionally, but ran into them at the store, had a repeat instance with them or that kind of thing. And I've had a few people that have shared with me, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about the Bible, learning more about God. But I think one time I had a study lined up that never ended up happening. But that kind of stuff, to me, in my opinion, it's kind of outside of your control. You're available, you make the offer, the invitation, but ultimately they have to be the fertile ground that takes you up on that offer. Clay, Aaron, y'all have anything to add to that?
You covered it well.
Not too much. I'm pretty blessed. The company I work for, Christus, is a Catholic company, and we are not um, discouraged, but rather highly encouraged to offer to pray with our patients. And
That's
so
fantastic.
it's almost expected, if you're a religious provider, that you offer that at least. So
That's awesome. Yeah, it's rare to find places like that, it seems like. Well, one of the most common questions that I get, and I'm sure you guys would agree, is any time that people find out what you do, they want to know, how do you deal with it? How do you handle seeing all of that? Sometimes it's prayer, sometimes it's God helping me to process what I've seen, or things like that. But that question can sometimes also open doors to deeper things. The way that I can handle seeing all this is because of my faith in Jesus. My faith that my belief that we live in a broken world where bad things happen, but if we live in obedience to God, that's all going to go away one day. And that's what gets me through those hard days. What about you? What's kind of y'all's go to when people ask you, how do you handle your job? How do you handle what you see? Clay, you want to start?
sure. I kind of like you said, it's because of my faith. I give it to God. When I see something that's really bad or whatever, uh, I just pray about it. Ask God to take that on for me and not let it linger and dwell in my mind and my heart anymore. Uh, and I keep in mind that it's all in God's plan. And as much as we hate to admit it, this world is not perfect, and sin has brought death and suffering into this world. But God is in control, and um, my job is to simply ask God and try and keep someone here a little longer than uh, perhaps the world had intended for them. But if ultimately, if it's God's plan for that person to not be here anymore, then there's nothing that I can do to stop that from happening.
No
And
amount of
I think,
epinephrine is going to change that.
yeah, uh, I think of Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28, where Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And so I just, whenever I'm feeling heavy laden with the things in my job, I go to God.
Awesome. Aaron, how about you? Anything to share?
Yeah, I used to there would be certain situations where they would stick with me in my mind and I couldn't stop thinking about them. Couldn't sleep very well. And so I started journaling. And I would also say that back then I was not, as Paul said in First Thessalonians 5, praying without ceasing. But I think both of those together, journaling and praying about it, that was kind of like something I could point to as the point in time where I could just, it's out of my system now. It's in God's hands. I mean, it's always been in God's hands, but it's kind of like me saying, here it is. And I've been able to move past those a lot easier now. And then I can go back and also read about those in my journal. And it's kind of inspires me in a way to think about that situation and be more intentional whenever I'm presented with a similar patient scenario in the future.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't really thought about journaling actually, but that's a therapeutic way of getting some emotions out and trying to work through those. Yeah, but ultimately, I think that we all are like minded, and perhaps a lot of our audience that ultimately at the end of the day, it's God. It's our faith and the thought that whatever's happening to this person, it's the terrible things that happen in this world will one day come to an end for those who are found in Christ Jesus. I remember years ago, my youngest daughter Clara, she had a pretty traumatic entrance to life, and we spent a month in the NICU at the University of Iowa Hospital here, Children's Hospital. And I remember, and that's always stuck with me, just the amount of hurting people there. I mean, it was a very solemn place. And I just remember, like, obviously I was sad about my daughter and the situation we were in, but there's also such a peace that came because I knew what was waiting her, if she didn't make it. And I'm thankful that, God saw fit to answer our prayers and leave her here with us for now. But I just remember, like, man, to be in that situation and not have the faith aspect of it to keep you going is just, yeah. So thanks for sharing that. Well, there are young Christians listening right now who may be considering entering into healthcare, emergency services, medicine, and they're good-hearted people. They're obviously people that want to serve, and they're also people that want to serve God. But I think one thing that I was not prepared for, there were certain aspects of this job that would affect my spiritual life that I was not prepared for. Things that weren't talked about. And I know, Aaron, you said that your brother-in-law has an episode on this, and I listened to that episode, so I would recommend that as well. But these people need guidance, and I just kind of want to open this time for you guys to share your thoughts on what advice you would give a young Christian that wants to enter into medicine or emergency services. Nehemiah, you want to start us off?
For sure. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I have so many thoughts about this. You might have to cut me off if I just start rambling. But I, people people told me that there was going to be dangers whenever I got into EMS and fire, and I believed them. But I think I underestimated the influence that that would have on me. I would say the number one thing that I underestimated was how much influence that environment can have on you without even realizing it sometimes. And so I would say whenever I got in, there were some issues that I had in my spiritual life before I got into EMS and fire, which doesn't make anything any better. Like that obviously makes things just worse. But while I was there, um, I underestimated what an influence that was going to have on me. And I went in with the right intentions. I went in with the intention. I didn't go into it as a job. I really didn't. I went into it because I wanted a place to express the love and the care that I had for people because of the care that Christ had shown to me. Like I wanted to be able to pass that on and to serve my community, especially since as a young man, when you're 18, like I had interest in joining the military, like that had an appeal to me, and I didn't go that path. I wanted something else that I could do to serve people, and so that's why I got into it, because I was a Christian. But if you let yourself fall down a path where you lose your Christianity while you're there because you're a Christian, it doesn't do anybody any good. And it definitely doesn't do you good. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I have, because of my time in EMS and the influences that I've been around while I've been there, I've lost that. I've lost my, the faith that I had. I've lost my, like my commitment and my appreciation for the church. Like it just completely kind of left me for a time. And like I said, there was some issues going into that, but a lot of the specific things that you're around, people don't realize just how filthy that environment can be sometimes. Like I've been around people that I don't know how they do it, but they fit a cuss word in like every third word, like literally every third. And I don't know how they do it. And then a lot of times it's just the conversations that people have, completely inappropriate things that people shouldn't be talking about. But beyond that, I would say that, like Aaron was talking about earlier, you're very close to those people. You build a bond with those people. And even if you feel like you're there to influence them, they will influence you if you're not really intentional about it. And it just changes your normal. Like if church is your normal and what you grew up with, a good mom and dad is your normal, whenever you spend a lot of time in that environment around those people, even if you don't want to be like them, they will change what normal seems like to you. They will start making sin not seem quite as bad. They will make it just seems more normal to you.
Mhm.
And that has definitely
Everybody
drawn
does
me.
it.
Yeah. And that has definitely
That
taken me
idea.
down. Yeah. And that has definitely drawn me down some paths. Like I remember, and not that I was thrilled whenever I saw this, like I was disgusted, but I remember stepping out of my room one time whenever I was on shift. I used to work at a company and it was like 2.5 hours away, and I would go work 72-hour shifts, and I was 96-hour shifts. So I was gone just a lot. Like that was kind of where I lived to a certain extent. And I remember stepping out of my room one day and everybody was in like the break room watching this TV show. I have no idea what it even was, but it was just like total nudity on this TV show on the main TV right there in the middle of the station. And that's just what people were just in there laughing and talking and carrying on, and they just thought it was funny. But that's the type of environment that you're around. And for me, that on top of other things, just led to not really having a really strong desire for being around Christian people, for being going to church events and stuff like that. I haven't really talked about this publicly all that much, but I struggled with pornography for a time, and being in EMS was one of the worst things to actually overcome that in the environment that I was. And I had to implement some significant changes whenever I was working through that kind of thing. The language, it will influence you sometimes. Those words will start coming up in your mind without realizing it. And then before you know it, they will come out sometimes. But I would say overall, there's a lot of specific things that come up for me whenever I think about the influences that can have on you, and how dangerous that environment can be. Obviously, like you have working 24-hour shifts with men and women and navigating that too. But more than that, I would just say overall, it just led to kind of a lack of desire to really lean into my life as a Christian and to let my light shine. And it like that just went stagnant and went out for a while I was in EMS. And thankfully, I can say that that is not at all where I am today. But I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. I have a younger brother who is talking about getting into EMS, and that should be like something that I'm excited about. To be honest with you, it scares me to death because and I want to encourage him, and I have like I told him I would do anything for him, like to help him on that journey. But it really hurts to have to tell somebody like that somebody, my younger brother, should be able to look up to me, and I have to tell him, don't do what I did. 100%, I would give anything for you to not take the same path that I took. You might can do some of the same physical things, but whatever you do, please don't do the same thing that I did. And I wish I could tell him, hey, do the same thing that I did. Maybe you can like that should be the example of what it should look like. But it's not. Like you just need you need to have a plan going in of how you're going to handle situations. You need to make sure that God is at the center in everything that you do. That you're going to be super pleasantly obvious about your faith. If anytime that you start trying to put a bushel over that candle, um, it makes it a whole lot harder to live your Christian life out in your personal life because you're trying to hide that. And so
Hmm.
you quit exemplifying that in the way that you live your life. And I could go on, but there's a lot of specific practical things I think it's good for young Christians to think about when they're going into it. But mostly just remember why you're going into it and don't forget that why. Like keep that why at the top of your mind. And as a Christian, I think that why should heavily include Jesus Christ and the fact that you are trying to spread and allow your light to shine to the world through the love that you showed other people out there. And that shouldn't ever go out. Like that should be super obvious. That should be at the very front of why you do what you do. And if you ever start feeling that kind of going out and you're starting to do the job for other reasons, and if you start
Hmm.
feeling like you're trying to kind of be a little bit sneaky about how you go about your life as a Christian. Number one, that's not how you're supposed to live as a Christian. But secondly, you better be careful because whenever you start approaching it with that attitude, pretty soon you're going to start giving into temptations and stuff, and sin is not going to seem like sin anymore. But yeah, I will shut up because I could go on and on about that forever. But I really appreciate you bringing that up because I do feel very passionately about that because I think it's good for Christians to be in that field, but to be very aware of the dangers that are associated with it too.
Well, I'm glad you brought up something about just a minute ago about being secretive. That's something that I've found that's helped me a lot over the last several years is, well, first of all, like you said, don't keep I think you talked about not keeping your faith a secret. That's huge. Don't be, if you feel like you have to keep your faith to yourself to fit in, something's wrong. And that's not a place that you should be striving to fit into. I want to speak a little bit more practically, more relationally, and this is huge in my opinion. Like you said, we work 24, 48, 72, 96-hour shifts with people. We go through hard times where we lean on our coworkers. And
Hmm.
you bond with your coworkers. I had a job one time where I had my EMT partner was a girl about my age, and we got to be very close because we had that in common. We spent a significant part of our life dealing with trauma, and it is very easy to allow bonds that shouldn't be there necessarily. Sure, be friendly with your coworkers, and yeah, sometimes you need that. I mean, emotional care to a certain extent. My one piece of advice, especially, well, I guess to brothers or sisters, is when you start feeling like you have to keep your personal life a secret, your relationship status a secret, when you're afraid to talk about your husband or your wife to people of the opposite sex, that is a huge red flag. And I've worked with a couple of people that have been like that. I know of a person. I never worked with him. I just know of him. I've seen him around a lot. I know him pretty well. But he never, I mean, he is a he's a player, you know. He gets out and he flirts with the nurses and things like that, and he's got a long time committed relationship that he's in, and none of the nurses that he flirts with knows about it. And I've never really felt like it's my position to say anything about it. But if you ask them, especially a couple in particular, they think that they're the one, you know. And to me, that's just a huge red flag. I don't, you know, I want to be open about my faith, but I want to be open. You know, I'm married. We've been married 11 years. I've got a beautiful family. I'm thankful to God for my family, and to me, that helps me in my, like, to me, whenever I talk, and I talk about my wife and my kids all the time, and that helps keep temptation at bay. You know, that, to me, that helps eliminate one form of the temptation that we face on the job, is because, you know, it's not anything. If I start to feel like I'm having to keep that a secret, then I need help. Like there's something wrong. And that was just something that popped in my head when you were saying that. Aaron, you have anything to share on this?
Oh yeah, I feel like Nehemiah over here. You gotta muzzle me at some point, but I would just say, as a if you want the full version, just go read an article I put on my website, 5minuteBibleStudy.com, 10 years of being a Christian nurse, and I share some of this in more detail. So just the highlights. I thought about that a long time ago. Obviously, some of the temptations that you go through, and that's what that article is about. And the big ones in the nursing world, I would say, y'all touched on a couple of them. Just worldliness, like Nehemiah was talking about. In general, I guess worldliness would capture a lot of that. Gossip, oh, it's incredibly pervasive.
Wait, there's gossip in the nursing world too?
Well,
What?
okay, this is not a sexist comment, but I think every woman would tell you this, that women love to talk about other women behind their back more, I feel like, than men care to talk about other men behind their back. But it happens both ways. I'm not saying it's only women. I'm just saying when you get a bunch of nurses that are women, they will just tear each other apart behind their back. And I've walked up on people talking about me, and you walk up and they all of a sudden shut down. You know, it's not a joke. Guess who's they're talking about? You know, when I was first in the nursing profession, I got pulled into that some, and then I realized, you know, this is just not healthy. For one, it's not moral. It's not good. For another, it's sinful. And it's just, you can really stand out by not talking about people behind their back. Another one was, the biggest question that I get from young Christians who are entering the nursing profession or considering it is about, you know, Aaron, can you be a nurse and not work on Sundays and be sure about that? And so I end up answering that question a lot. And I just am 100% confident, because I've done it for 12 years. You do not have to work on a Sunday morning in the nursing profession. I don't know about EMS, but
Same in EMS. I've never had to.
you may not get the job that you want. I've lost jobs because I wouldn't work on Sunday. I had a manager tell me, "You will never work on my unit," when I was an intern at this hospital. And that's fine. I didn't want to work for her anyway. But, you know, you may not be able to work day shift. I had to work night shift for a long time because I wanted to be a trauma nurse. And to do that and not work on Sunday for sure, I had to work night shift. I had to drive 2 hours one way to work a travel nurse position in Michigan to go study with Brother Ron Porter. And that's what I had to do, but I was able to do it. You know, you may have to put out extra effort, but don't let anybody tell you that you have to work on Sunday, because you don't have to do it. And if you're firm about that up front with the manager, then they'll believe you. But if you are soft about it, or you're not clear about it up front, then they'll put pressure on you. So you just got to be very firm about it. And the other was just what you said, Matt, about like lust and being around people, especially, you know, we're all guys here. There's always been one woman. This was before I was married. This doesn't apply now. There's always been one girl in the ER wherever I worked who was a very immoral woman, and she was very flirtatious, and she was, as we say, maybe I shouldn't say this, trying to get in my pants. And that was just everywhere I went. Now that I'm married, I always talk about my wife as much as I can, and I don't even feel that. I don't even feel like women are trying to do that to me. Maybe that's just because I'm oblivious, and I don't think it's just me either. I'm not being like big headed here. I think it's any man. I think women, are, as a general rule, they find self esteem when a guy shows interest in them, and it doesn't really matter who you are. We have to be especially attentive to, if you are married, talking about your wife as much as you can with what you said. And if you aren't married, making a covenant with God, and just making that firm commitment before you go into this profession, because it is going to be an assault.
Absolutely.
The first ER I worked at, I found out after I left, a close friend of mine told me that 3 of the doctors were having affairs with nurses in the ER, and one of them had 2 families, and he was exposed. And his real family found out about his other wife and kids, in the ER. And it's just, I didn't know that about them, but I assumed that there was probably some infidelity going on. I didn't realize it was that bad. And I assume where I work now, it's just as bad. I just don't know who the doctors are and who the nurses are.
Somebody told me one time, or maybe I read it somewhere, I don't recall, that you only know of about 10% of the infidelity taking place in your workplace.
Oh, yeah.
That, I could believe it. No, I mean, very few people are going to be bold enough to talk about it so openly. And we've seemed to find those people in our career field that are open to talking about it publicly, but that's 10% of them.
Hey, might I say real quick, because if there are any ladies that listen to this, I don't want them to think that I was taking it out of them. I worked with some amazing women, and I still do. And I am a believer that I do believe there are certain temptations that are stronger for men and some that are stronger for women. And in the workplace, in the nursing profession, I think it's a stronger temptation for women, in my experience, to gossip, and to try to get self-esteem built up by, flirting with guys that they work with. And I'm sure that there are guys that do it too. As a guy, I'm just feeling the brunt of that, who's trying to do what's right.
Absolutely. Clay, what about you?
I wouldn't have a whole lot to add to what Nehemiah and Aaron have already said. My thoughts would be very similar. But it's very important to guard your heart in this, your heart and mind in this field. And part of that is, like Aaron said, protecting your Sundays. And you do have to be very firm on that. My advice on that would be to build a reputation. And once you've built a reputation of integrity and being a good worker and everything, and never working on Sundays, like Nehemiah said, it's pleasantly obvious to people who you are, and the attempts to tear that down become a lot less frequent. I had to start my career in EMS being part-time PRN per diem type work. But once I had been in EMS for a while and I'd built a reputation, I work a full-time 24, 48 hour shift. So I'm 24 hours on, 48 hours off. That means every third Sunday I'm scheduled for 24 hours, 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. And I've been doing that for 3 years now, and I've never worked a Sunday. They just know I won't be there. All my shift commanders know that if I can't find somebody to cover my shift, I'm calling in sick. I'm not going to be there. To the point that they call me if they see my name still on the schedule for Sunday, and they say, "Are you, going to put in PTO or just not show up?" I said, "Well, you know what to do."
Yeah, and that I appreciate what I forget. Aaron, I think Aaron said it too. Is it may mean that you don't get the job that you want.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that where there was a certain career department that everybody in the area wants to work for, and they're very well known, very well respected, very good paying. It's a city job, so city benefits, and I'd like to think I could get on there if need be. I've got fire experience, and I've got obviously a lot of EMS experience and so on and so forth, but I don't even try because I know the expectations that they've set there. And there's a list a mile long of people that are, you know, applying there that aren't limited on their Sundays. And I just, that was a decision I made where I didn't even want to apply because I anticipated the pressure. And so I've just always found jobs where I don't have to work. So I don't even have to worry about Sundays. I like you, Clay. I did a 24/48 schedule for several years, and they knew I wouldn't be there. That was the agreement we made when I started. Was that third Sunday I was just off, and which it actually ended up being pretty nice because I get a 5-day vacation every 3 weeks. But yeah, it's like Aaron said. Sometimes it just means you get the career field you want, but maybe not the specific role that you want. But that's all part of guarding your heart and making sure that your priorities are where they should be. Last question, guys, and I'd love for each of y'all to chip in on this. We've talked a lot about sharing our faith at work, and we've talked about it in the regard of the medical industry and the emergency medicine aspect of it. But let's think more broadly. Maybe there's people that are tuning in that they don't work EMS, they don't work nursing, they have no interest in it. What would you say to somebody who thinks that evangelism just doesn't belong at work? Nehemiah, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Um, I guess I would probably, and this might seem like a little bit of an off the wall verse, but I really don't think it is. Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, where it talks about us living as living sacrifices. And I think that that just goes back to we have a lifestyle and a mentality of evangelism. We have a mentality of shining our light in the environment that we're in. You could go obviously to the Great Commission and many other examples that I think clearly show that no matter what environment you're in, that's an environment that you can use for evangelism. But mostly, I just want to approach work and any interaction that I have with somebody, any environment that I'm in, as an environment where I shine my light. It's not my light, like Clay was saying. It's God's light, and just to put yourself in a place. And I've had this direct conversation with coworkers because I really think that this applies probably to your coworkers more so than like your patients. But I've had a lot of conversations with them because I really don't want people to see. Sometimes whenever you're in that environment and they know that you don't cuss and you don't sleep around, you don't do all these things, they think, oh, Nehemiah, he's such a good guy. Like what a good guy Nehemiah is. And I don't mind people, like, I should be living a moral life. I should be living an upstanding life, but I don't want people to just see me as a good person, because if I die today and the only thing people see me as is a good person, then I've failed at my mission as a Christian, because my job is to make God look like a good God. And I want people to see the light of Christ reflected in my life. And so I just think that no matter what environment you're in, that's an environment that you shine the light of Christ in, and you allow other people to see that light. And one specific thing that I've done in regards to that is I'm pretty open about the mistakes that I've made in life with people that I work with. And I think that that allows them to see, because they might look at me as, oh, he's an upstanding moral person. I want them to see that without Christ, I was not a good person. But with Christ, that's the only thing that changed. Now I am now I am the person that you see today. And the only reason for that is Jesus Christ. And I just really want people to be able to see that in me in any interaction that I have. And that will lead to a lot of really sometimes painful conversations, because you have to be humble in order to present yourself, like to be able to say, hey, I've made mistakes, some really embarrassing mistakes sometimes. And that makes me look bad. And that's okay, because it gives God a unique opportunity to look really, really good whenever I can show them this is what God was able to do with my life. This is what he was able to do in spite of all the mistakes that I've made. And it just, to me, that gives an opportunity, number one, to help me stay humble, and then secondly, to help God really look like the God that he actually is, and just shine that light no matter where you are. It doesn't matter who the person is. I've had like really intense conversations with Catholics at work, and I've also had really kind of deep, almost emotional conversations with homosexuals at work. The whole spectrum, like you're just there as a representative of the good news that you've been offered, and it doesn't matter what environment you're in. That should radiate off of who you are. And I don't want people to see Nehemiah. I want them to see Jesus Christ. And it would be totally fine with me if the day I die, people completely forget about me, and the only thing they see is Jesus Christ, and they totally forget who I am, because that's my job. I don't have the job of making myself look good. My job is to make God look good, and that's a Christian's job, no matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're working healthcare or, um, as a CEO at some tech business. You're always supposed to be shining that light. And so I would just say that's not the Christian's job. The Christian's job is not to pick and choose where you shine that light. The Christian's job is just to shine it and then let God do the rest.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Clay, what about you?
Um, Pretty much the same thing as what Nehemiah said, but I'll just share a couple more verses. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, we see that the Apostle Paul is speaking of liberties there, Christian liberties. And I think it could be certainly said that we have liberty in choosing what career we go into as Christians, and how we choose to make ends meet for our families. I'm there in verse 31. He says, "Whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the for the glory of God." And I think that's important in the workplace to, like Nehemiah said, to continue to shine the light, God's light there, not our own. And in similarly in Colossians chapter 3 and 17, again he says, "Whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him." Uh, uh, Everywhere we go in life, we have to reflect God's light, because you never know who's around you, who's watching, who's seeing things. Uh, like I was saying with protecting your Sundays, I've never been the type to push my beliefs on people. Um, I certainly will gladly share if I think someone has some interest in that, but there's a lot of times where certain coworkers, maybe they're the type who's uh, a particularly immoral person in one way or another. Um, I may not bring it up to them for one reason or another. It may be just that it's a busy shift, an overtime shift with a partner that I don't normally work with. It's busy. We don't have a chance to bring it up. But in my company, we have about 120 EMTs and about 120 medics. And anybody who knows my name knows that I don't work on Sundays. And it's amazing to me how many people see that and then combine that with the fact that I don't cuss at work. I don't cuss in my life at all, but uh,
Thank you for that clarification.
but when they put those two things together, they automatically assume that you're religious to some extent, and it's wild how many of my coworkers who I've never had a conversation about religion or God with will, out of the blue, ask a question. I had one coworker one time. I worked a lot of overtime, uh, or no, he worked a lot of overtime, and he came to work on my truck one time. Never had any kind of conversation with this guy, and he out of the blue says, "I've been reading the Old Testament. You know a lot about the Bible, right?" Yeah, yeah, I do. I guess you could say that, I guess. And he says, "I've been having a hard time reconciling all the genocides in the Old Testament with the loving God that's in the New Testament." He's like, "How do you make sense of that?" I'd never even mentioned the Bible to this guy, but he brought it up to me because he knew that I don't work on Sundays and I don't cuss. And those two things must mean that you know a lot about the Bible, apparently. So it's uh, funny how passive sharing the gospel can be at work if you're being a good Christian. So
Absolutely. Aaron, how about you?
Oh, I just appreciate what y'all have said, and I think you should take that clip that Nehemiah shared and just make it a short on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah.
I really appreciate just the way you expressed that. And the Romans 12 passage was the one that came to my mind. So I just back on that. Paul sums it up as your whole being is your body and your mind, at least in that passage. And he says the whole being of your existence is a sacrifice to God. And we compartmentalize parts of our life, and we think it's okay to do that because that's socially what's acceptable, and that's not biblically what's acceptable. If you're a Christian, you're a Christian, and you're all in. And if you're not, then get out, because that's why Jesus told him, certain people in Luke 14, you cannot follow me, you can't be my disciple. He told 2 people that because they didn't have an all-in mentality. And if you got fired for evangelizing at work, that would be awesome. I'm not trying to get fired, but if you did get fired for that, that would be awesome, because we're not dying for our faith over here. So if you lost your job for your faith, what a blessing. That's the kind of joy that that's a smidgen of the joy that Peter's talking about, taking rejoicing in trials for your suffering in 1 Peter 1. So that would just really ironically be a great thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, one thing to think about too, I think it was, I don't remember, one of you guys had talked about choosing Clay, the liberty of choosing a career field. We're reminded, in fact, Paul talks about, and I think it's 1 Corinthians 5. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 5, about, of course you're going to be around immoral people in this world, because otherwise you'd have to go out of this world. And we may talk about our field because we know about it. We all know that there's immorality in every field, and maybe it's a little bit more concentrated in this field, and there's perhaps reasons for that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what field we've chosen. We're going to face temptation. We're going to face immorality, and we have to be a light to those people. We have to realize that when we go out, when we go to work, we're evangelists, or we should be evangelists. That evangelism's not limited to a gender. It's not limited to an age group or a cultural demographic. You don't have to be a preacher or have formal education. I tell people evangelism is the natural result of being transformed by the gospel. And if we have the light of Christ in our life, if we have the love of Christ in our life, it should manifest to other people, like Clay had said, both passively and also because we want to share that with other people. We want, we enjoy talking about exciting things in our life, and so we should talk about Jesus as well. We have a unique ability in the shifts we work, the people we work with, to build relationships with people. And we need to remember, and this is for everybody in every field, we need to remember the power of relationships and never undermine the evangelistic opportunities that come up with the people that we care about. And one of you guys said, nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care. Once they realize that, we need to use it to lead them to Christ. So thank you guys for what you've shared. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I apologize for the tech issues. Every one of us, folks, is expected to go out in the world like we just talked about when Paul said that. And for some, that world is an office. For some, it's a classroom. For some, it's a veterinary clinic. But for these guys today, it's an ambulance and an emergency room. And we may try to make it sound exciting and say that we want to save lives when we go to work, and that's certainly the case. But ultimately, what God wants us to do is use where we are as a way to point to the one who can save their soul. And I hope that that's something that you take with you as the result of this conversation today. Guys, appreciate you being here, and appreciate your input. As we wrap up today's conversation, we're reminded that our work and our job is more than just a paycheck. And regardless of whether you may wear scrubs to work or an EMS uniform, maybe you wear a hard hat, or maybe you wear business casual, you have a much greater purpose where you're at. Every day brings opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities are small. Sometimes they're life-changing, and sometimes we don't see the results of those efforts that we take until much later. You may never preach a sermon, you may never stand in the pulpit, but your life is a sermon, and that sermon is heard every day by those who we spend our time around. And that brings us to the final word for today. In Matthew 5, verse 16, Jesus says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." So in your home, in your workplace, in your community, shine that light. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Plain Gospel Talk. My name is Matt Tyson, and if you have any questions, if you'd like to learn more about the Bible or begin your walk with Christ, please reach out to me. You can reach me at 319-493-2900. You can email me at theguyfromdownsouth@gmail.com, or you can find me Sundays and Wednesdays at the Cedar Terrace Church of Christ that meets at 2543 Cedar Terrace Drive in Waterloo. You'll find us there Sundays at 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Thanks for tuning in to the Plain Gospel Talk, where Scripture always has the final word.